Michelle. Michelle, can you open us in prayer, please?
Can. Hi, I'm Michelle, a compulsive overeater. Um, okay. God, thank you for all of the people here at this meeting. And please help us set aside anything we think we know about you, about this program, about ourselves, about the big book. And I just pray that our minds and hearts are open for new learning. And I just pray for Janet and Melissa as they guide us and help spread the message. And I pray that we can just all get closer to you and be useful to others. And we are better together. And I'm grateful for everyone here. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. And tonight, Melissa will be presenting on the prefaces and forewords at the very front of the big book. So,
Excellent. Thanks. Thanks so much, Janet. Hi, friends. My name is Melissa C. I'm a recovered compulsive overeater and happy to see lots of new faces here and, excited about this new year ahead of us. We're back in the beginning of the book again. And since there are some new people here, I'm going to try to hold up my phone. I always like to, if I were at a face-to-face meeting, I always like to share my pictures. And if I were savvy enough, I would have had it ready to go and done it on the screen. But I didn't think of it until I saw some new people there. And I don't know if you get a sense. It's hard to see, here how, where I was when I came in. And that was just the outside, right? But at at my top weight, I was over 300 pounds. I was owned by the food. And I thought, I didn't think that a big book would have an answer for someone like me. I really just always wanted a diet book. And I certainly wouldn't have ever read a big book like this, the preface or the beginning or anything. I would have scrolled right to the middle or maybe the end to find out like where's the secret, where's the trick. But there is none. I mean, there is, but it's buried within and it requires work, but it's work that it's a pleasure to do, and it works. In that period of time, I've released over 160 pounds, and better than that, I live free from the food that owned me, and the spiritual malady that was like, as bad as I looked on the outside, I felt like I was being eaten alive on the inside. It was misery living inside of me. And I don't live that way anymore. Today, I really live happy, joyous, and free. And it's a result of this book. So we're going to jump into the book. We're going to start with the preface. And before we start, I want to be really clear. I'm not a historian. So I know there are people who are like incredible historians of AA. And if you pick up the big book, they'll give you lots of wonderful facts. And I'm grateful that those people exist. I'm just not one of them. So I'll share a little bit more of my personal experience and how the text relates to me, and the principles that I learned through right in the preface. So right in the very, very beginning in the preface, on page XI, it says, because this book has become the basic text for our society and has helped such large numbers of alcoholic men and women to recovery, there exists strong sentiment against any radical changes being made in it. Therefore, the first portion of this volume describing the AA recovery program has been left largely untouched in the course of revisions made for the second, third, and fourth editions. The section called the doctor's opinion has been kept intact just as it was originally written in 1939 by the late Dr. William D. Silkworth, our society's great medical benefactor. So basically what we're saying is, don't fix what works, right? You're not going to find a new and improved plan. The revisions that were made are not changing any of the instructions. The instructions stay the same because they work. And it's been effective for so many alcoholics, and luckily for us, for compulsive overeaters as well, right? And then the second printing, it goes on to say that the second printing of the first edition added the appendix, the spiritual experience. And, if you quickly, I know we're studying the preface, but if you quickly, because it was mentioned, just turn to 567 just for a moment. I'm going to just read a little bit of it. It says, "Yet it is true that our first printing gave many readers the impression that these personality changes or religious experiences must be in the nature of sudden and spectacular upheavals. Happily for everyone, this conclusion is erroneous. In the first few chapters, a number of sudden revolutionary changes are described. Though it was not our intention to create such an impression, many alcoholics have nevertheless concluded that in order to recover, they must acquire an immediate and overwhelming God consciousness, followed at once by a vast change in feeling and outlook. But among our rapidly growing membership of thousands of alcoholics of such transformations, though frequent, are by no means the rule. Most of our experience is of what the psychologist William James calls the educational variety, because they develop slowly over a period of time." And so this was added afterwards, because they didn't want to discourage the alcoholics who hadn't gotten it like that, who didn't have a white light religious experience. And I know for me, I'm so grateful that that was put in there, because I had to work a lot harder for change to occur. And that's really what we're told, that a spiritual awakening is a personality change. And it didn't happen overnight. It was a process. And at some points, it was a painful process, but it was a process. And so that was put in there specifically as encouragement, to encourage us to keep working. So now let's go back again. We're going to go back to the preface again, and we're on page XI. And now it's going to talk about some of the changes. And it says, "But in the chief change was in the section of personal stories, which was expanded to reflect the fellowship's growth. Bill's story, Dr. Bob's Nightmare, and another personal history from the first edition were retained intact. Now it goes on to say a little further that all changes made over the years in the big book have had the same purpose." So now we're going to find out why it is why we would ever change anything. It's to represent the current membership of Alcoholics Anonymous more accurately, and thereby reach more alcoholics. So that's like our mission, right? We want to reach more people. And that was the purpose of the text. The purpose, this book was written to reach addicts, because they realized that there were so many and they couldn't get to them all word of mouth, that they needed a book so that they could spread it out, so they could carry the message out. And what we found is that the stories were somewhat, they changed some of the stories along the way, added them, because we need identification. That's an important part of how we come to get well. The more we can identify, the greater we can see that this can be a resource to help us too. And I know my own experience is that, I remember coming to one of my first meetings, and there was a woman there. I thought she was just beautiful. She was dressed she had a gorgeous suit on, and she had like nice earrings and a nice haircut. And I really walked in, I could barely make eye contact. I was so beaten down. And out of this, I thought at first, what does she possibly have in common with me? And then she started to tell her story. And I was like, how does she know what I do? I almost felt like she had been like, what did she have, like secret cameras in my house, because out of her mouth was what I'd done. And it got my attention. It got me to listen and to stay, So then it further goes on to say that if you have a drinking problem, we hope that you may pause in reading one of the 42 personal stories and think, yes, that happened to me. Or more important, yes, I felt like that. Or most important, yes, I believe this program can work for me too, right? So Now we're told how we share. These are the directions to tell me how I'm going to share my story when I talk to people. I tell what happened, the experiences that I've encountered in the disease, right? The once embarrassing stories for me are now like they're my calling card. They're like what I use to help other people. And when I share, I try to share my experiences and not just my knowledge. Right? Knowledge is good, but experience is what opens up the heart for people. Because my doctor had lots of knowledge, and my doctor could never get anything across to me because he didn't share the experience with me. I found people respond to stories rather than lectures. I know for myself, I pay closer attention when someone is telling me a story from their past than just the facts. And we also tell about the feelings that we've had. The feelings that never were shared, we share here. And so many of us have felt like a real common thread of feeling is isolation, right? And we thought we were the only ones who walked around feeling a particular way. But when we hear that others felt the same way we felt, then we can truly have hope that this program can work for us too. And the reason we tell our stories is it's not like a drunkalogue. It's not like, let me tell you all my war stories. Ha ha ha. This is funny, or almost in a bragging way to tell like how awful I was to sort of gain your pity or something. It's to offer hope because I'm no longer suffering that way anymore. And it should hopefully help someone else who might still be there. So now let's look at the foreword to the first edition. And it starts off here. We of Alcoholics Anonymous are more than 100 men and women who have recovered from a seemingly hopeless state of mind and body to show other alcoholics precisely how we have recovered is the main purpose of this book. So first of all, I just love that part. It's like right there, it says that 100 have recovered, from seemingly hopeless. So to me, this means I wasn't ever actually hopeless, right? But it appeared that way. It seemed that way. On my own, it was hopeless, and so I love definitions of words. And if I look at the word recovered, here's what it says. Here's a definition: to get back, regain, to bring back to normal position or condition. Rescue, right? Rescue is another word. To make up for, like if you recover the cost of something, you're making up for it. So we recover, it's kind of like we get to make up for where we had been, make up for our past. Oh, I lost my page. To gain by legal process. Oh no, I thought that was interesting. We gained something. And what hit me was through process. I saw process there. To reach, to find or identify again. And I love to think about that. Like I found myself again. The self that I never even knew I had was found again. And this is interesting too. Another definition is to obtain from an ore, a waste product, or a byproduct. So I think about myself like recover. I was a waste. Somehow I was like a waste product. And I actually got this from what seemed like wasted, what seemed like it was. It kind of tells me that my suffering wasn't in vain. It was actually a benefit. There was something that was going to come from it. And another definition is to save from loss and restore to usefulness. And to me, that's the real definition. That's what it means to be recovered, so that I am useful. I am useful. These definitions to me all explain why we can say what they said, recover. And I know for me, that word gave me hope. When I heard that word, it told me that I could live in a way where I was no longer fighting and battling. And even better is that I'm going to be told precisely, that's an important word here, precisely how to get well. And I thought, last time Janet, when she shared, somebody was saying, why hadn't it worked for me? And I thought it was a beautiful illustration about taking your phone, and instead of pressing like that, you can take pictures with it, but instead of pressing, the camera button, you're pressing like the home button or whatever it is. And you're saying, this doesn't work. Well, there's a precise way. There's a precise way. Um, and, I know for me that in some of the rooms of Overeaters Anonymous, there were people, and myself included, who were offended by that word. And, I was offended, but then quickly I was curious and excited when I heard that. It changed from feeling like that's ridiculous to feeling like, tell me more, tell me more. And what I found is that where people are not experiencing it, and who might not like the word, it might be, the problem might lie within the definition of precise. And so precise is exactly or sharply defined or stated, minutely exact. 3, strictly conforming to a pattern, standard, or convention. My God, I didn't like that. You're going to tell me I have to conform. I want to do it my way. I want to take what I want and leave the rest. That doesn't sound like the recipe to get recovered, right? If it's precise, I'm not going to pick and choose, like I say, like off the Chinese menu, combinations. No, you're going to take the whole thing, um, and precise also means distinguished from every other. So precise, right? Exact. So if you're not getting the results, it may be helpful if you examine to be certain that you're actually following the directions precisely. And these people who got well didn't do certain steps, they followed them in order and completely. The forward also explains that we're sick. It also goes on to say that we're sick. And this wasn't stated in a judgmental way, but truly as a medical diagnosis. We have a disease, and that's good news, because this is a disease that actually has treatment. It has a treatment plan. And when I accept the fact that it's a disease, I lose my like thinking that I'm being bad when I'm eating again, right? It's not a morality issue. It's that I'm not well. It's that I wasn't well, and I better follow the precise directions, the treatment plan, so I can get well. It goes on to also say that this program has had a positive impact on it has advantages for all. And that I say this program has had a positive impact on every relationship in my life. It has made me a better mother, a daughter, a sister, a wife, a teacher, a friend, a neighbor, really an all-round human being. And just by the number of people I interact with, this program touches the lives of many. It changes our lives. We become different people. And then it says a little further, it says, we would like it understood that our alcoholic work is an avocation. On the next page, it says there's no fees or dues whatsoever. And so for me, I say avocation, it's a hobby, right? But it's also a passion. It becomes our life's work. It becomes truly like how I identify myself. It's what I do. And so we need anonymity. Why? So that we can support ourselves financially, because we're not using this as a vehicle for income, right? There's no money being made in AA or OA. And if people start asking you, to pay them for their services, you're in the wrong program. This is not the way our fellowship works. And for me, it's quite different from some of the other diet programs and self-help schemes that I found myself going to over and over again, wondering why I wasn't getting well. And it also makes me think about, I've had friends and coworkers who bought into different plans and schemes along the way. And they were always trying to sell it to me. They were always trying to, and same with like all those pay and weigh programs. They profited off of my misery. They profited off of my absolute devastating weakness. The pay and weighs, the packaged weight loss food services, all of those were schemes that were making money really off of the hope that I wasn't going to get well and stay well, that I was going to continue to need their services indefinitely. All of them were profiting off of my misery. And our association is not like this. No profit off of misery. The only requirement for membership is an honest desire to stop drinking. We're not aligned with any particular faith, sect, or denomination, nor do we oppose anyone. We simply wish to be helpful to those who are afflicted. So our only desire is to be helpful. Honestly, like that's it. And if you want to join us, there's only one requirement. That's it. You want to stop eating compulsively. That's all. Only requirement. So if someone says that they're not sure that they're a compulsive eater, right? Or they're not sure that they're willing to do the work, they're still welcome to join us. They can still be a member. They might not be ready for a sponsor. That's a different subject altogether. But they're ready for a membership here. The only requirement is a desire to stop eating. And they might not be ready to admit defeat or even be certain that they need spiritual help. And still they're welcomed. They're still invited and welcomed here. So now let's look at the foreword to the second edition. And it says and this is from 1939, right, when the original foreword was written, to this one in 1955, which is 24 years. A wholesale miracle has taken place. And I just love wholesale miracle. Wholesale means that it's performed or existing on a large scale, especially without discrimination, right? That's what it means if something is wholesale. Anybody, large scale, available to all. So this miracle of healing was and is something available to all people. Rich, poor, white, Black, Christian, Jew, educated, uneducated, doesn't matter what your political affiliations are, doesn't matter any of that. None of it matters. And think about, like, for a second, AA, how people in prisons and people in country clubs could all use the same set of directions and get the same beautiful results, right? Available to all. And not only that, here's like even better news. It works for a variety of addictions, right? It doesn't just work for alcoholics. We find out, guess what? It works for us too. Works for compulsive overeaters as well. It goes on to talk about the number of countries and fellows around the world, and that it was just a beginning. And we certainly know that that's the truth, right? So then on the bottom of page XV, the spark that was to flare into the first AA group was struck in Akron, Ohio in June 1935 during a talk between a New York stockbroker and an Akron physician. And this is exactly how it starts for us, right? It's a conversation from one addict to another. And from that, all sorts of miraculous healings spring forth. And they're talking specifically here about Bill W. and Dr. Bob. And here they describe how Bill had a spiritual experience, which was pretty sudden and intense after seeing his friend Ebby get sober, right? But that wasn't enough. It wasn't until Dr. Silkworth told him of the grave nature of this illness This is what made Bill grab hold of the tenets brought to him by the Oxford group. You know, I find that when we find we have no other options left, that when it's fatal, then it's not so hard to accept necessity to do these things. When you have run out, and that's what it was for me, when every other option no longer existed, I was like, well, I may as well do this, right? Seems like I need to do this. I got nothing else left. My fight was gone. My fight was gone, you know? And so it goes on to say, what is the need, right? It's not so hard to accept the need for, and this is at the bottom of XXVI, the bottom of the first paragraph. And now these are the precise things. This is part of the precise directions. Moral inventory, right? That's steps 4. That's step 4. Confession of personality defects. That's step 5. Restitution to those harmed. Step 9. Helpfulness to others. Step 12. And the necessity of belief in and the dependence upon God. That's steps 2 and 3. So if you notice, the required step before any of these is step 1 entirely. Step 1 is the realization no other options exist for me. I am powerless and unmanageable. There's nothing else but to do this. We follow the steps like our lives depend on it when we know our lives depend on it, right? Nobody else can tell you to do this like your life depends on it unless you know that your life is depending on this. And it just as an aside, it's like you're really, as someone who works with other people, you want them to be at that point so badly. And yet sometimes that requires a lot of pain, right? That's really, and that's the part where sometimes it's hard to stand by and watch. You want to rescue people from that experience, and you can't. You just can't, because then you're denying them of their own step 1 experience. They have to know that they're out of options. So before meeting Dr. Bob, Bill was working off of the theory that only an alcoholic can help another alcoholic. But at that point, he wasn't helping anyone except himself, right? Everyone else was failing that he tried. He was unsuccessful in getting anyone else sober. But here's the important thing. Let's not forget that he was still sober. So we're always out of the results business, because my recovery is not contingent upon anyone else's recovery. My recovery today is contingent upon me sharing my recovery, but I can't give you my recovery. Nobody can do that, right? Nobody can do that. And what happened here was the broker, now it goes on to say the broker had gone to Akron on a business venture, which had collapsed, leaving him greatly in fear that he might start drinking again, right? So Bill, there he is. He's in Akron, Ohio, and he suddenly realized that in order to save himself, he must carry his message to another alcoholic. And that alcoholic turned out to be the Akron physician, right? Turned out to be Dr. Bob. And what I love so much about this story is that, to me, it is evidence that my human mind really doesn't know what's best for me, or for that matter, what's best for the world at large, right? And that gives me comfort. That really just gives me comfort that I really don't know what's best for the world. And let's think about how often we want something. I know for myself how often I really want something, and I'm convinced that it very well should happen the way that I want, that it's wrong if it doesn't. And in fact, how often I've prayed for an outcome, and then when it didn't happen the way I wanted, for me, I would get mad at God and pretty much dismissed God's very existence, right? He didn't give me what I wanted. God's not doing for me what he should do. Therefore, God doesn't exist. And this kind of reminds me, this is something that I like to share, that I'm a human being. And so what I see is a finite view. What I see is just visible to my human vision. It's like I look through the keyhole of the door, right? That's what I see. I see this much. And I make all sorts of determinations and decisions about what that means, right? How it looks and what it means at large. But God sees what's behind the door, what's just beyond that door. And really that this particular story ultimately Bill's sobriety wound up strengthening as a result of his business not going well. He looked like he was failing, like everything was falling apart for him. And what happened at that moment was, although his circumstances, right, could have told him, I might as well go drink. And many of us have felt that way. Things suck. I might as well eat. But what he wound up doing was he used that as an opportunity to focus on helping others rather than feeling sorry for himself, and did not drown his misery with a drink. And my own experiences had informed me that when life is not going my way, if I focus on helping another compulsive overeater, I wind up far happier than if I had merely had my original wishes granted. It's been the truth every time. I just don't see it until maybe years later. I don't see it in the moment. Bill's business failure was really for the greater good, not just of Bill and Bob, but for addicts everywhere, right? God had a master plan. It wasn't just for Bill. He was working on a plan for humankind, right? So and that reassures me that when things are not going my way, I have to believe that there's a power that has the ultimate good in mind for everybody. Um, and so Bill's failure in business went on to help many. And then it goes on to say strenuous work, one alcoholic with another, was vital to permanent recovery. So if here's we're sort of being given the precise directions, right? If you want to get well and stay well, then you will work hard. It says hard, right? Not convenient, not occasional, right? Long-term recovery depends on how much you give away. And if you remember, like one of my favorites, right? And we've read it here and spoken about it in the chapter Working with Others. It tells us that nothing will so much ensure immunity. Nothing's going to keep us immune from this disease as intensive work with others, right? Intensive. And so I don't get to fit it around my Netflix time. I don't. That's not what it means. And if you're thinking, sometimes people are in a rush. They want to get through the steps really fast because they have this idea that when they finish the steps, they're going to get to go back to living how they lived before, right? And they're forgetting step one. They were dying. I was dying. What kind of a rush am I back? Am I rushing to get back? What life? There was no life. There was the life that I was destroying at my own hands. So you're not going to get, news alert, you don't get your old life back, right? That's not what we're promised. We're promised a new and wonderful life. That's what happens. The next part talks about the growth, which is interesting and historical, right? And again, I would said earlier, we have great historians who can give us amazing insight and excellent accounts, and I love that. And it also talks about the traditions which were introduced and established to keep the peace and productivity in the fellowship, which are also really important things so that we can function. But really what I want to focus on now is on page XX. And it talks about, if you turn to page XX, it says AA grew by leaps and bounds. And for this, there were two principal reasons: the large numbers of recoveries and reunited homes. And these made their impressions everywhere. Of alcoholics who came to and really tried, 50% got sober at once and remained that way, right? So those that came and really tried the precise directions, half of them got well right away. Of that, the ones that didn't, right? 25% of those sobered up after some time, right? And after some relapses, and among the remainder, those who stayed on with AA showed improvement. Other thousands came to a few AA meetings and at first decided they didn't want the program, but great numbers of these, about 2 out of 3, began to return as time passed, right? So these numbers are pretty incredible. And I wish I could say that we're having the same kind of growth in OA, but we're not, right? And why? Like, well, are people getting well? First of all, are they changing in profound and meaningful ways that impact and improve their homes? Or are they getting thin and then regaining their weight, right? Are we spending too much time sharing the message of abstinence rather than the message of the steps? Think about where you've seen the greatest recovery. And in my experience, for me, the meetings where the big book were shared and the specific directions being discussed and promoted are the meetings where people are in fact getting well. That's been my experience, that meetings where the big book is shared and the precise directions are drilled down are the places where we see growth happening and people getting well. So the forward to the second edition ends with this wonderful sentence. It is our great hope that all those who have as yet found no answer may begin to find one in the pages of this book and will presently join us on the high road to new freedom. So I just love that. That's just a sentence of hope, and it kind of stands alone. I don't really need to add anything to that sentence. Okay, so now let's look at the forward to the third edition. And it says here, surveys of groups in the United States and Canada indicate that AA is reaching out not only to more and more people, but to a wider and wider range. 7% of the AA surveyed were less than 30 years of age, and among them, many in their teens. The basic principles of the AA program, it appears, hold good for individuals with many different lifestyles, just as the program has brought recovery to those of many different nationalities. And, AA and really this wonderful book of ours and its principles are effective for a huge range of people, different nationalities and lifestyles and different types of addictions too. And clearly we compulsive overeaters are proof of this. And I just love, I think it was really exciting. I could tell there's some nice young people here and that there's an excitement. I think all of us feel it. Those of us who are not as young feel it. I'll speak for myself. It gives me a tremendous hope. I find that that's really what I hope to see. I work with young children. I teach young kids, and it hurts my heart to think that some of them have a lot more suffering left to go before they get it. But this tells me not necessarily. And I think that's where language of the heart really comes into play. One young person can share their experience, how they're living in recovery with another young person. They're much more able to hear the message than from, we say like in Jewish, Susan, like an altakaka, right? It's like a Yiddish word, like an old person, but there's a reason we identify with people for a variety of reasons, and so that really gives me hope. And no matter how big we're getting, it says here, so In spite of the great increase in the size and span of the fellowship, at its core, it remains simple and personal. Each day, somewhere in the world, recovery begins when one alcoholic talks with another alcoholic, sharing experience, strength, and hope. So, no matter how big we're getting, the way we carry the message is not with advertisements and billboards or by huge stadiums and gatherings, even. Although we love huge gatherings like OA birthday parties, they're awesome and amazing. They're great ways to come together. But recovery really begins when one alcoholic, right, shares with another. It's the one-on-one conversations. So different to me from the conversations where a doctor is telling you that you're killing yourself. Like that's what I would have, or where your parent or spouse or child pleads with you to stop, right? But what works is when one person, when someone told me, not that I was killing myself with food, but they told me that they were killing themselves with food and that their families pleaded with them to stop and still they could not. You know, that's what got my attention. We share our experience, the painful ones and the way we got well, and we share our strength and hope, the strength that comes from a greater power than a human being, and the hope that if I found it, so can you. All right, so now we're just going to look real quick at the forward to the fourth edition. And again, while there's a lot here about growth and how we're worldwide and represent so many different people, right? It says here, men who would normally not mix. What I wanted to highlight and discuss is on the bottom of page XXIV. Okay. While our literature has preserved the integrity of the AA message, sweeping changes in society as a whole are reflected in new customs and practices within the fellowship, taking advantage of technological advances. For example, AA members with computers can participate in meetings online, sharing with fellow alcoholics across the country or around the world. In any meeting where AA share experience, strength, and hope with each other in order to stay sober and to help other alcoholics. Modem to modem, face to face, AA speaks the language of the heart in all its power and simplicity. And my God, right? We couldn't have asked for anything better than, for me, than the invention of Zoom. I can't believe the power of this. You know, let us look, right? Look at us here and now, right? In this time of a worldwide pandemic, you know, where so much of the world is suffering from illness, right? From hopelessness, from fear, isolation, anger, right? We have found a vehicle for coming together and sharing our experience, strength, and hope. And I have to tell you, I've never felt alone during this pandemic. I haven't. I can't believe it. You know, in fact, our own small meeting, this was a small meeting. It started out as a handful of people, but it exploded because the language of the heart is being shared here. That's what happens. And that's where the meetings really grow. And I just, you know, really want to close with, I see some people I work with, you know, people who I have neighbors, and they feel really alone. They're really struggling. They're having a hard time. And if you would have said to me years ago that someday I would be really grateful that I was morbidly obese, I would have said never, 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 right? I was seeing my life through the keyhole of the door, right? But thank God I had that. Thank God, because that gave me the necessity. You know, I don't feel alone because I need this fellowship, and this fellowship exists. So Thank you all so much. With that, I will stop. I will pass.